a retired rescuer, a storm that wouldn't quit, and a sound in the distance that turned a quiet road into a test of faith. What he found out there in the mud wasn't just a life worth saving. It was the one truth he'd been running from for years. Don't miss it. Like, subscribe and comment where you're watching from if you think you've guessed the twist before it comes. The heat was the kind that clung to skin and refused to let go, the Louisiana kind that made even air feel heavy. Darius Holt, a black man in his mid-40s, with shoulders built from years of rescue work, drove his dented Ford along the back road that snaked through the cypress trees. He'd spent 15 years in the city's emergency response unit before leaving it all behind. Too many nights pulling bodies from floods, too many mornings staring at ceilings that smelled like smoke and memory. Out here, he found silence. But today, that silence broke. It came as a faint sound, at first a bark that barely reached his ears through the open window. He frowned, leaned forward. Another bark followed, weaker, jagged, almost shaped like a cry. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. That wasn't the call of a stray dog looking for company. That was panic. He pulled to the side of the road, the tires kicking dust, and killed the engine. The cicadas screamed so loud, it felt like the world was vibrating. But beneath it all, the sound came again. "Hey, you okay out there?" he called. No response. Then faintly one bark paused two short ones. It was rhythmic, like code. The old instincts that never left him stirred. He grabbed his cap, wiped the sweat off his brow, and stepped into the blinding sun. The air shimmered the smell of wet soil mixed with gasoline. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved except for the sway of tall reeds near the ditch. "Come on now," he muttered, more to himself than to whatever was out there. His boots sank an inch with every step as he pushed through the brush. His shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat, and the air seemed to grow thicker the deeper he went. He crouched near the ground where the sound had echoed from. Muddy paw prints pressed deep into the earth. They weren't random, they looped in circles, claw marks gouging the soil as if something had struggled to escape. He followed them until he reached the edge of a shallow marsh, half hidden by cattails. Then he froze. A weak bark closer now rose from the left. "Hey boy," Darius shouted instinctively. And then impossibly, the sound came back in rhythm, one bark, then two. A perfect reply. No way, he breathed, half smiling, half uneasy. He hadn't heard an animal answer like that since the old days, training rescue dogs for disaster response. Maybe this one had belonged to someone once. Maybe it still believed someone would come. He stepped closer to the noise boots sloshing into the muck. The ground trembled beneath him, water bubbling where he placed his feet. He stopped when he saw it, a patch of slick dark mud shifting as something inside moved weakly. A flash of gold fur broke the surface, then disappeared. "Oh God," Darius muttered. The dog was trapped in what looked like a sunken pit, the kind that formed after weeks of heavy rain. Half its body was submerged, its head barely above the surface. The mud sucked at it every time it tried to move. "Hey, easy," Darius said softly, lowering himself to his knees. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The dog stilled, trembling eyes wide with terror. The sun reflected off the wet fur, turning it almost bronze. He could see the whites of its eyes, the labored breathing. "You're stuck good, huh?" he murmured. He reached for his phone, thumb fumbling against the screen, but the signal bar was dead. No service. He cursed under his breath and looked back toward the road, too far for a clear line. He'd have to climb the ridge again to call for help, but when he turned back, the dog let out a low whimper, one paw barely lifting, sinking again. Okay, Darius said quickly. "I'm not leaving you." He stood, glanced at the tree line, then up at the sky that shimmered white with heat. "Hold on, boy." He moved fast, retracing his steps to the truck, feeling every second tick inside his chest like a heartbeat. Once he reached the road, he climbed onto the hood of the Ford and held the phone high, praying for a single bar. Nothing. He moved a few steps, held it again. One flicker, then 2 bars. "Come on," he muttered. Finally, a faint signal caught. "Yes." He dialed the parish rescue dispatch. "Yeah, this is Holt, former city unit. I got a dog trapped in a mud pit off Route 16 near the bayou. It's bad. Might need a small crane or at least a winch truck. Send someone fast." The line crackled, but a voice answered. "Copy that, Holt. Stay on site. We'll track your location." Darius exhaled relief, cutting through the heat. He climbed down, pocketed the phone, and headed back toward the marsh. The air felt heavier now, like even the world was holding its breath. The reeds swayed again as he approached. "Hey, I'm back," he said gently. The dog lifted its head weakly, eyes catching the light. "You hanging in there?" The creature made a faint guttural noise, half bark, half sigh. Darius knelt near the edge, close enough that the mud touched the toes of his boots. "You got a name, huh?" he asked, scanning the neck where a collar should have been. And there it was, half buried in mud, a metal tag caked in dirt. He leaned forward, brushing it clean with a finger. The letters were faint, but readable. Rook. "Rook," he whispered. "You got fight in you, don't you?" The dog blinked slowly, like it understood. Darius sat there a moment, the world around them still, except for the soft hum of insects. He told himself he left rescue work behind for peace, but now, staring into those pleading eyes, he realized peace had never been what he was looking for. He missed purpose. And somehow, this broken, mud-covered creature had called him back to it. He glanced down at his watch. Rescue should be 20 minutes out, if the roads held. He looked back at Rook and smiled. Darius stayed beside the pit long after the call ended, the hum of insects and the distant groan of tree frogs filling the heavy air. He kept his eyes on Rook, whose chest rose and fell slowly, but still showed the faint rhythm of life. The rescue crew was on their way, but in this swampy corner of Louisiana, on their way could mean 10 minutes or an hour, depending on how stubborn the mud decided to be. The afternoon heat pressed down, rippling off the surface of the pit like steam, and the smell of wet decay hung thick enough to taste. Darius shifted to his feet, scanning the area, looking for anything that might keep the dog afloat, or at least prevent the mud from swallowing him further. He found a fallen branch nearby, half rotten, but sturdy enough to serve as a wedge. As he pushed it toward Rook, his boot slipped and struck something metallic under the muck. He knelt down, reaching into the thick clay fingers, brushing cold metal. When he pulled it free, it wasn't a stick. It was a rusted tag still clinging to a twisted piece of broken collar. The engraving was faint, but visible under the grime. Milo. Darius froze, the word catching somewhere between memory and dread. He turned it in his hand, saw the corrosion, the chew marks. This tag had been there a long time. His gaze drifted over the pit's edges, and that's when he noticed the faint impression of old paw prints fossilized in dried mud around the perimeter. They weren't Rook's. These were smaller, lighter, long hardened by time. "You weren't the first, huh?" he murmured. The thought made his stomach tighten. This pit had taken something before. Maybe it had been waiting ever since. Rook whimpered again, snapping Darius back. He pocketed the tag without thinking and moved closer to the edge, planting his knees in the soft soil. "I'm here, boy. You're not going to end up like the last one," he said under his breath. The dog's eyes rolled toward him, glassy but alive. Darius reached out the branch again, trying to slide it beneath Rook's shoulder to create some leverage. The mud hissed bubbles rising from underneath, as if protesting the interference. When he pressed harder, the ground trembled beneath his own knees. "Easy now," he muttered. He had seen enough landslides and sinkholes to know when the earth was warning him. He shifted his weight backward, but the suction caught his boots with an audible slurp. "Aw, hell," he hissed. He pulled, but the mud pulled back harder, the kind of grip that didn't like letting go. Panic flickered at the edges of his mind. The swamp was unpredictable. Just a few wrong steps could turn solid ground into a hungry mouth. The dog barked once, short and hoarse, as if sensing his fear. Yeah, I got it," Darius said, trying to sound calm. He leaned forward, grabbed the nearest root protruding from the mud wall, and yanked himself free with a grunt that echoed through the trees. His heart pounded. The sole of one boot tore halfway off, but he didn't care. The message was clear: one more careless move, and they'd both be buried in the same pit. He scooted backward, finding a slightly firmer patch of ground, and breathed hard through his nose, forcing his pulse to steady. "All right, new plan," he said to himself. He looked around for anything stronger than a branch. A few yards away, an old fence post jutted from the overgrowth. He grabbed it, shook it free from its roots, and dragged it toward the edge. He wedged it at an angle, building a crude ramp that stopped short of Rook's body. "You hang in there," he whispered. The dog blinked slowly, its breath shallow but steady. Sweat streamed down Darius's temple, dripping into his eyes, stinging. He swiped it away and pulled his phone out again. No new signal bars. He didn't even have time to curse this time. The air around him grew still unnervingly, so the kind of stillness that always came before a storm or a mistake. Somewhere behind him, a frog croaked once and then went quiet. The ground made a sound, a soft pop, followed by a sucking groan. His gut clenched. "Don't do this now," he muttered. He pushed up to move, but the pit shifted slightly under Rook, the edge collapsing another inch inward. Mud splashed against his jeans. "Hey," he shouted instinctively, as if scolding the swamp itself. Rook gave a startled yelp, flailing just enough to sink his front paw deeper. Darius lunged without thinking, sliding his arm forward to grab the dog's collar, and the earth gave way beneath his knee. He slammed his hand against the post, stopping himself from plunging in completely. But the mud clutched at his leg like a vice. He could feel the suction creeping up, the unmistakable pull of swamp mud swallowing him by degrees. His breath came sharp and shallow. No, not today," he growled. He pressed his free hand down on the post and heaved upward, muscles straining until the sound of air bubbles broke the tension. His leg popped free with a wet gasp, splattering his face with dirt. He sat back hard, gasping, half laughing from adrenaline. "You trying to take both of us, huh?" he said out loud, shaking his head. He looked down at Rook, whose head now rested on the mud eyes, blinking weakly, but still locked on him. "All right, partner, you win. I'm staying right here till they come." The world around them seemed to exhale again, the sounds of the swamp returning. Slowly, cricket cicadas, the distant buzz of a passing truck on the highway. Darius wiped the mud off his arm, his pulse still hammering in his ears. He looked at the tag again, rolling it between his fingers before tucking it into his shirt pocket. The storm rolled closer, slow but certain. The kind that built itself one cloud at a time until the sky turned bruised and heavy. Darius could smell it in the air, the metallic taste of rain long before the first drop fell. He crouched at the pit's edge, watching Rook's chest rise and fall. The dog was quiet now, too quiet, and that silence carved something deep into Darius's gut. He'd seen the same kind of silence in people too, the quiet right before the body gives up. "Not today," he whispered. He reached for the fence post he had wedged earlier, adjusting it, digging it deeper into the mud for support. The sound of thunder rippled across the bayou like a warning. He slid the end of the post closer to Rook's front paw and began to pull. The mud answered with a wet hiss, and bubbles began rising to the surface. Then, without warning, a pocket of trapped gas burst from below, belching out a stench so strong it made his eyes water. The pit shifted. Rook yelped the sudden suction, pulling him down another inch. No, stay with me," Darius shouted. He dropped the post and lunged forward, grabbing the dog's collar with both hands. The mud pulled back a living thing, greedy and unrelenting. Darius dug his boots into the slope, using every bit of strength left in his shoulders to counter the pull. He could feel the collar straining, threatening to snap. "Come on, boy, fight with me," he growled. His arms burned the muscles in his back, screaming, but he didn't let go. Rook flailed weakly, his paw finding a bit of solid edge to press against. Inch by inch, they clawed back ground the pit had stolen. When Darius finally managed to drag Rook's upper half onto the incline, he collapsed forward, breathing hard, his forehead nearly touching the mud. "That's it. That's my boy," he said, at voice trembling. The thunder cracked again, closer this time, echoing through the trees. The wind picked up, bending the reeds, scattering the smell of swamp rot through the air. Darius glanced at the horizon. The clouds now split with lightning. The rain was minutes away, and if it started before help arrived, the pit would flood. "We don't got time, Rook," he muttered. He reached into his pocket for his phone, fingers slick with sweat and dirt. He tried to dial again, but the screen flashed red, signal lost. He moved toward higher ground, lifting it above his head like before, but his boot slid on the mud, and the phone flew from his grip, spinning once in the air before plunging into the swamp with a soft final plop. Darius froze, staring at the widening circle of ripples where it vanished. "You gotta be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. He knelt, reaching for it, but the water was black and thick, the kind that didn't give anything back. He let his hand fall, cursing himself quietly. "Guess it's just us now," he said to Rook. The dog blinked slowly, his nose twitching at the smell of rain. Darius took a deep breath and looked around his mind, slipping back into the old search and rescue mode. Every environment, no matter how bad, had a weak spot, something you could use to turn the odds. The pit had caved in from one side, which meant there was firmer ground opposite it. If he could make it around the back, maybe he could dig a path wide enough for Rook to climb. He stood brushing mud from his hands and tested the ground with a stick. It sank slow but steady, not as treacherous as where he had been kneeling. "All right, soldier, here's the plan," he said, voice steady, even though his pulse wasn't. "I'm gonna circle around. You don't move till I tell you." He moved carefully along the edge, one step at a time, testing each patch of soil before trusting it with his weight. The trees overhead swayed as the first gusts of wind pushed through. A branch cracked somewhere to his right, the sound sharp as gunfire. He flinched, then kept going. When he reached the far side, he crouched and began scooping away mud with both hands, creating a shallow groove. It was slow work. Every handful he pulled loose seemed to slide back in, but he kept at it. He'd spent his life fighting losing battles like this, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that persistence could outlast panic. Behind him, Rook made a low sound, half growl, half plea. "I know, buddy. I'm coming," Darius said. He dug faster, his palms raw, his arms shaking. The sky opened suddenly, fat drops of rain splattering against his neck and shoulders. The mud turned slick, instantly doubling its weight. Within seconds, his trench filled with brown water. "Damn it," he shouted. He slammed his fist into the mud and leaned back, catching his breath. Then he heard a low rumble that wasn't thunder. It was mechanical, distant, but real. He stood straining to listen. The sound came again, a metallic grind followed by a horn blast. Relief crashed through him like a wave. "The rescue team, they're close, boy," he shouted over the rain. He waved both arms, trying to catch sight of the flashing lights he prayed were out there. The wind carried his voice into the trees, but no answer came. He grabbed the fence post again, used it to hoist himself higher, and shouted until his throat hurt. A second rumble answered a heavy engine, this time tires groaning over wet ground, the sound of a vehicle forcing its way through mud. He smiled for the first time in hours. "That's them," he said. But before he could move, the earth beneath him let out a soft sigh, almost human in its tone. He looked down just in time to see the mud shift under Rook again. The dog yelped, sliding an inch toward the pit's center. "Hold on," Darius roared. He dove forward, catching the collar again, his knees digging into the ground that was quickly becoming sludge. His fingers slipped, once caught again, holding tight. "You're not going anywhere, you hear me?" he shouted through gritted teeth. The rain poured harder, drumming against his back, stinging his eyes. Somewhere behind the curtain of trees, the engine grew louder, but time stretched into something meaningless. There was only him, the mud, and the heartbeat of the animal in his grasp. He pulled again 1 inch at a time until Rook's front legs were solid on the incline. "That's it," he gasped. "That's it. Stay." He let go only when he was sure the dog wasn't sliding back. Both of them sat frozen for a moment, breathing like they'd just fought the world. Then Darius started laughing loud, tired but alive. The rain became a living thing, thrashing at the earth with relentless fury, turning the swamp into a single pulsing body of brown water and noise. Darius crouched over Rook, one hand shielding the dog's head, as the wind whipped leaves across his face. The distant lights of the rescue truck flared once between trees, then vanished again, swallowed by the downpour. He tried to shout, but his voice was shredded by the storm. Lightning flared white behind the tree line, and for a heartbeat everything froze: the rain, the air, the sound. Then the thunder rolled in so hard it rattled his ribs. Darius looked at the pit, now a swirling basin of rising sludge, and knew he didn't have much time. "They gotta see me," he muttered. He reached into his wet jacket and pulled out the emergency radio clipped to his belt, the same one he'd kept since his rescue days. It had survived hurricanes, flood rescues, even fires. He flicked the switch and prayed the battery wasn't dead. Static crackled faint and brittle, then a voice flickered through, chopped by interference. "Copy. Rescue unit. Holt. You copy, over." Darius pressed the button hard, his thumb shaking. "This is Holt. I've got a live animal half submerged in a sink pit off Route 16, 200 meters south of the canal. You're close, but not close enough. You took the wrong turn. Follow the Thunderhead East, copy." The line hissed, then died to white noise. Come on, don't do this," he growled, slamming the radio against his knee, water dripping down the device. After a tense few seconds, the voice returned louder, this time full of alarm. Negative, we're stuck. The truck's sinking terrain's unstable, copy." Darius's heart dropped. "You're where the ground breaks near the low ridge. Get out and move on foot," he yelled, his voice breaking through the rain. But then the response twisted into chaos static, shouting someone saying the left wheel's gone, and then silence. The signal faded entirely. Darius stared at the small red light on the radio, now blinking weakly. No, not now," he whispered. The storm screamed overhead, sheets of water slamming into the swamp so hard the mud hissed with each drop. He turned back toward Rook, who had begun to tremble uncontrollably. The dog's breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed. Hey, stay with me," Darius said, pressing his palm against Rook's chest. The heartbeat was faint, but still there. He forced himself to steady, to push the rising panic back down where it belonged. "You hear that, boy? They're coming, you just gotta hold on a little longer." He wasn't sure who he was trying to convince anymore. Another lightning bolt clawed through the clouds, splitting the sky in two. The thunder followed, instantly deafening, shaking the ground. The smell of ozone burned in his nose. Darius grabbed the radio again, lifting it toward the sky, trying for any flicker of signal. The light blinked once, then flickered out. He banged it with his palm, his old instinct telling him to keep trying, no matter how hopeless it looked. "Rescue team, this is Holt. Do you copy the pit's collapsing? I need confirmation." Only static answered. "Damn it," he shouted, hurling the radio to the ground. The device hit the mud with a sharp crack, but didn't break, just spat out another burst of static. Then, like some cruel trick, the line cleared for a second, and he heard a distant voice, "See your flare hold position," followed by a loud metallic screech and the sound of glass shattering. The voice cut off entirely. The red light blinked one last time before fading to black. "No," Darius whispered, picking up the radio again. He shook it hard, but it was dead. He slammed it against the ground once, then again the frustration bursting out of him like a dam breaking. "You can't quit on me now," he shouted to no one, to everything. Then came the flash, a white so bright it erased everything for a single second. The air itself felt split in two, and the next thing he knew, a tree 20 feet to his left exploded in a shower of sparks and wood chips. The blast threw him backward into the mud. His ears rang, his chest burned, and his hand instinctively covered his face. The scent of burned bark and sulfur filled the air. His vision blurred, and when he blinked the world back into focus, the radio lay a few feet away, smoking split down the center. His heart pounded a deep echoing thud in his chest. He rolled onto his side, coughing, his face streaked with mud and rain. The lightning strike had scorched the ground, blackening the nearby reeds. Rook barked weakly, a single trembling sound that sliced through the ringing in Darius's ears. He turned his head, saw the dog's eyes fixed on him, fear and confusion written all over its face. "I'm good," Darius croaked, his voice hoarse. "I'm good, buddy." He pulled himself upright, ignoring the stinging scrape on his forearm. The storm roared overhead, lightning spiderwebbing across the sky, each flash reflecting off the rising floodwater. The air vibrated with energy. "Okay," he muttered, breath shaky. "No phone, no radio, no help." He laughed once dry and bitter, then looked at Rook. "Guess it's just us again, huh?" The dog blinked, letting out another weak sound that somehow steadied him. He crawled back toward the pit's edge, using the remains of the fence post for balance. Every part of him ached, but quitting wasn't an option. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll do it the old way." He tore off his soaked jacket, twisted it into a rope, and tied one end around the branch nearest the pit. The other he looped under Rook's chest, careful not to hurt him. The rain pounded harder, but the knot held. "Now when I pull, you fight back. Don't let it take you." He grunted, yanking with everything he had. The mud groaned, stretching like something alive. The dog whimpered, struggling but trying, pushing against the incline with his front paws. Darius leaned back, muscles straining, and for a moment nothing moved. Then the suction broke with a deep, disgusting slurp. Rook's body shifted upward another foot. Darius lost his footing and fell back, laughing breathlessly through the rain. "That's it! You're doing it!" he yelled. He pulled again, the veins in his arms standing out like cords. Another inch, then another. The storm screamed overhead, lightning painting the trees in ghostly blue. When they finally stopped, both man and dog were gasping, coated in mud, trembling. The storm had started to thin into a steady, punishing rain by the time the first flash of orange emergency lights appeared through the trees. Darius looked up, his vision blurred by exhaustion and mud streaks, and for a second, he almost didn't believe what he was seeing. The grinding of gears, the crunch of tires fighting the swamp, and the muffled shouting of men through the storm cut through the chaos like salvation itself. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, yelling hoarsely, "Over here, follow my voice." The lights bobbed, then steadied as the truck pushed through the last patch of reeds and came into view, a white utility vehicle half-coated in brown sludge with the word "Rescue" painted in fading red letters on its hood. Two men jumped out before the vehicle even stopped moving, both in rain-soaked uniforms, faces tense, eyes wide as they took in the pit. "Holy hell," one muttered. "That's deeper than it looks." Darius pointed toward Rook, whose trembling body now barely stayed above the mud. "He's fading fast. You got lines. A winch." The man with the radio nodded, waving at the driver. "Hydraulics up. Get the lift arm extended." The truck's engine roared louder as the boom arm started to rise. Darius felt something inside him loosen, a thread of hope tugging him toward the edge. Maybe finally this nightmare had a way out, but the swamp wasn't done with them. The moment the rescue truck stabilized near the pit, the ground beneath its rear tires began to groan. Mud bubbled up and the entire chassis tilted slightly to the left. "Back it up 2 feet, Darius shouted, waving his arms. "The ground's too soft there." The driver tried, but the wheels only spun, digging deeper. The rescuer beside him cursed, fumbling to deploy stabilizers, but the suction was relentless. "We're gonna lose the back axle," someone shouted from the cab. "Cut the weight." The driver hit a lever, releasing pressure, and the truck steadied, but the cost was clear. The winch arm hung short of the pit's center. "We can't reach him from here," the operator called, frustration cutting through his voice. "Then we move closer," Darius snapped. "You move any closer." "We lose the rig," the man countered. Darius clenched his jaw, breathing hard through his nose. He turned to the younger of the two men, a lean guy with a rope slung over his shoulder. "You," Darius said. "Hand me that line." The man hesitated. "Sir, we're supposed to—" "That's an order," Darius barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd once led people out of hell. The man obeyed, tossing the rope over. Darius tied it around his waist, looping the end around a nearby tree root, then waded toward the pit. The rain hit harder now, cold against his skin, but his blood was burning hot. Rook lifted his head weakly, eyes glassy, but still aware. "I got you, buddy," Darius said, voice rough. "We're gonna get you home." The rescuers worked fast, anchoring another line to the hydraulic arm, lowering the metal hook toward him. Darius guided it with one hand while steadying Rook with the other. "Easy," he called. "Lower it slow." The hook dipped into the mud beside Rook's body, and Darius looped the harness under the dog's chest. "Now lift," the boom groaned. The cable tightened, and for a moment the system held. The mud strained and stretched, bubbling up in thick waves as the dog's body began to rise inch by inch. Darius's heart thudded. "That's it, keep it steady," he shouted. Then came the sound every rescuer dreads. The sharp, high-pitched whine of metal under too much pressure. "Wait, slow it down," Darius yelled, but it was too late. The cable snapped with a violent crack, whipping across the air like a live wire. The hook slammed into the ground just inches from Darius's knee, spraying mud into his face. The harness loosened instantly, and Rook slid downward, swallowed halfway by the pit. Without thinking, Darius dove in after him, the cold mud closing over his thighs, pulling hard like hands from beneath. "Darius, get out," one of the rescuers screamed. He didn't hear it, or maybe he did, and didn't care. His hands found Rook's collar under the surface, slick and trembling. He pulled with everything he had, planting his knees against the edge of the pit, his boots sinking deeper every time he shifted. The mud tried to take them both, sucking at their weight like some greedy ancient thing. "I said not today," Darius shouted through clenched teeth. Lightning flashed again, turning the swamp silver for a split second. The rescuers scrambled to secure a backup line. "Get that secondary cable ready," someone shouted. "We got 1 minute before the rain fills it completely." Darius barely heard them. His focus narrowed to the one thing in front of him, keeping Rook's head above the rising sludge. The dog wheezed, coughing weakly, but his eyes locked on Darius. "You're fine. You hear me?" "You're fine," Darius said, his voice breaking. The backup line came down a moment later, thicker reinforced. "Hook's ready," a rescuer yelled. Darius reached for it, fumbling through the mud until he caught the cold metal. He looped it around Rook's torso again, tightening it until it bit into the dog's fur. "Go," he screamed. The hydraulics whined. The cable groaned, and slowly, agonizingly, the dog began to rise. The suction fought back, releasing in gurgling fits as chunks of earth gave way. Darius held the line's steady shoulder muscles, screaming, his arms slick with blood and dirt. The rescuers pulled in rhythm with the machine until finally Rook's body broke free, spilling a wave of black water as the pit released its grip. The dog dangled in the air for a heartbeat before the operator swung the boom toward the drier ground. "Lower him now," Darius ordered, crawling out of the pit just as the cable began to lower. The rescuers laid Rook on the wet grass, covering him with a thermal blanket, checking his pulse. "He's breathing," one shouted. Darius collapsed beside him, coughing hard, his chest tight with exhaustion and adrenaline. He could barely feel his legs. One of the men crouched beside him. "Sir, you're gonna need a checkup too." Darius shook his head, waving it off. "I'm fine. Just get him warm." The younger rescuer nodded, draping another blanket over Rook's body. The air after the storm had that fragile stillness that comes right before the next disaster, when everything breathes at once, but nothing dares move. The rain had eased into a mist, and the trees whispered with each gust of wind, dripping water from their leaves. The rescue truck's lights cut hazy beams through the fog, painting the pit in streaks of dull orange. Darius sat in the mud, trembling from exhaustion, watching as Rook's chest rose and fell under the blanket. The rescuers were already packing up the damaged winch line, one of them shaking his head at the snapped steel cable. "That could have taken your head clean off," the younger man said, glancing at Darius with disbelief. Darius gave a tired smile. "Would have been one hell of a way to go," he muttered. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. The adrenaline that had carried him this far was gone, replaced by a crushing weight of fatigue. One of the rescuers reached out to help, but Darius waved him off and steadied himself against the side of the truck. "Just give me a second." The older rescuer, a man with deep lines around his mouth, stepped closer. "You're lucky, Holt. That dog owes you his life." Darius looked over at Rook, whose head had turned slightly toward him. "Nah," he said softly. "We owe each other." He reached down, giving the dog's ear a gentle squeeze. Rook's tail flicked once weak but deliberate. It was a small movement, but it told Darius everything he needed to know. The connection between them, born out of mud rain and raw will, was stronger than anything else in that swamp. He exhaled and glanced towards the tree line. The clouds were thinning, a faint bruise of blue starting to push through the gray. For a fleeting moment, he thought they'd made it. Then, without warning, the ground beneath his boots shifted with a deep, throaty groan. "Wait, stop moving." The older rescuer barked, but it was too late. The soil near the pit had been hollowed by hours of rain, weakened from where the hydraulic rig had pressed down. The earth gave way in a slow, horrifying lurch. The back tire of the truck sank several inches, and Darius felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. "The foundation's gone," someone yelled. "Back it up." The driver slammed the gear into reverse, but the rear end slid deeper. Mud gushed like liquid, pulling the steel supports inward. The entire rig leaned toward the pit with a grinding screech. "Get clear," the young rescuer shouted, but Darius wasn't fast enough. The ground cracked beneath him, and his world tilted sideways. His boots slipped, his hands clawed at empty air, and then he was falling again. The pit swallowed him up to his waist before he could even scream. The suction was stronger this time, thicker alive. He tried to push himself up, but the mud held him in place like concrete. "Darius," someone shouted from above, but he could barely hear them over the sucking roar in his ears. He gasped as the cold wrapped around him, pulling him lower. His instincts screamed to keep his arms out to stay above the surface, but his strength was fading fast. The mud reached his chest, bubbling up near his collarbone. Panic tore through him like lightning. "No," he grunted, twisting hard, but every movement only pulled him deeper. His fingers found nothing but slime. He could feel the pull against his ribs, the way the ground seemed to breathe under him. He knew what it meant. This wasn't just a pit anymore. It was a sinkhole forming under the pressure of the rain and the machine. The earth itself was collapsing. "Grab the line," someone yelled, but when Darius turned, the nearest rope was just out of reach, dangling uselessly above his head. He stretched for it, fingertips brushing air, but the mud sucked at him harder, pulling him down another inch. He felt his pulse hammering against his throat. He didn't want to die like this, not after everything. He tried again, teeth clenched, pushing upward with every ounce of strength left in him, but the mud refused to give. His vision blurred at the edges, his breath growing shallow. Then out of the corner of his eye, something moved. Rook. The dog, still wrapped in his blanket, had managed to drag himself closer to the edge. His body trembled violently, every motion costing more energy than he had to spare. "No, stay," Darius rasped. "Stay back." But Rook didn't listen. With a low growl, the dog bit down on the edge of Darius's sleeve. The force was weak, desperate, but it was there. Darius blinked disbelief, mixing with a surge of fierce hope. "You stubborn thing," he breathed. Rook pulled again, his teeth digging into the fabric, his paws scrabbling for grip. The rescuers saw what was happening and rushed forward. "Hold him. Don't let him sink," one of them yelled, diving for the rope. Darius grabbed it the moment it brushed his fingers, wrapping it twice around his wrist. "Got it," he shouted, though the mud muffled his voice. "Pull!" The rescuers leaned back, straining against the weight, while Rook refused to let go, his teeth still locked on Darius's sleeve. The rope tightened, cutting into Darius's skin, but the pull upward was stronger than the mud's drag. Inch by inch, he began to rise. The mud made wet sucking noises, reluctant to release what it thought it owned. "Keep pulling," the older rescuer barked. Darius's body felt like lead, every breath a battle, but he refused to stop. He kicked once, twice, forcing his legs free. When he finally broke the surface, the rush of cold air hit him so hard it made him dizzy. The rescuers dragged him out and onto solid ground, collapsing beside Rook. The dog whimpered softly, finally releasing his grip. Darius rolled onto his back, coughing mud spilling from his lips. The sky above him was clearing, faint sunlight breaking through the clouds. He turned his head toward Rook, who lay motionless for a second before lifting his head weakly, tail twitching. "You saved my damn life," Darius whispered, voice raw. One of the rescuers crouched next to him, shaking his head in disbelief. "Never seen anything like that," he said quietly. "That dog pulled you up before we even got a grip on the rope." Darius reached over, resting a shaking hand on Rook's neck. "That's because he's got more fight in him than half the people I've met," he said. The swamp exhaled steam as the last of the storm clouds broke apart, overhead sunlight spilling through the shredded sky like gold veins against slate gray. The world smelled of metal ozone and wet earth. Darius sat beside Rook, still panting, his hands trembling uncontrollably from exhaustion. The rescuers were catching their breath too, voices low but alive with adrenaline. One of them handed Darius a canteen. "Drink up, you need it." Darius nodded, taking a slow sip, the water tasting like rust, but better than anything he'd ever had. He looked at Rook, whose sides rose and fell unevenly under the blanket. The dog's fur was caked in mud, his breathing shallow, but there was fight left in him. Darius could feel it like a pulse shared between them. "We're not done yet, boy," he murmured. The rescue truck rumbled faintly, its hydraulics whining as the operator tested the boom arm for stability. The older rescuer called out, "We'll lift him onto the platform, keep him level, then load him into the truck bed. Should take 5 minutes." Darius stood, despite the protest in his muscles. "I'm going with him." The operator frowned. "Sir, best to stay clear. The arm's been through hell already." Darius's eyes hardened. "You saw what that dog did for me. I'm not standing on the sideline now." The man hesitated, then nodded. "All right, your call. Just stay clear of the pulley housing." Darius gave a tired grin. "I'll behave." He crouched beside Rook as they fastened the harness again, this time under the dog's belly with a thicker strap and 2 lines. "You ready, soldier?" he whispered. Rook's ear flicked once weak, but enough to make Darius smile. The operator shouted lift, and the hydraulic arm began to hum, the platform rising slowly, creaking under the weight. The men guided the ropes, carefully adjusting the angle. The sound of metal grinding against itself echoed through the clearing. The dog lifted higher, the line steady. Darius followed, staying close under the platform, ready to stabilize if needed. For a few glorious seconds, everything held. Then, without warning, the arm jolted and emitted a high-pitched whine. The platform jerked upward sharply, the gears locking. "Shut it down," someone yelled, but before the operator could react, the entire boom arm lurched backward, swinging Rook toward the truck like a pendulum. "Cut the line," the older rescuer barked, but Darius was already moving. He sprinted through the mud, jumped onto the lower crossbar of the rig, and grabbed the steel frame of the platform as it swung. "Hold it steady," he shouted, but the mechanism ignored him. The hydraulic system groaning like an injured animal. The swing widened the metal, screaming with stress. Below him, one rescuer shouted, "It's overloading the winch motor." Darius hooked his arm around a support bar, bracing his feet on the side of the platform. "You gotta stabilize from the base," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "We're trying," came the reply. The platform hit the truck's side panel with a loud crash, denting the metal. Rook yelped in terror. Darius reached across the shaking frame, his hand gripping the harness loop around the dog's chest. "It's okay, buddy. I got you." The cable above them rattled, vibrating violently. Sparks flew from the motor housing. The smell of burning oil filled the air. "We're losing pressure," someone screamed. The hydraulic fluid hissed through ruptured seals, spraying across Darius's sleeve. The entire boom shuddered again, threatening to give way. Darius looked up following the sound and saw the main coupling beginning to split, the thick steel cable unwinding fiber by fiber under the weight. "Get clear!" he shouted to the men below. "It's gonna snap!" He knew if the cable broke, the arm would fall straight onto the truck, crushing anyone beneath it, including Rook. "Move," he bellowed again, voice raw. The rescuers scattered, diving away from the base. Darius shifted his grip and climbed onto the main pivot, one arm still wrapped around the dog's harness. He glanced at the truck's control console, its lights flashing red. He knew those signals. The pressure regulator had failed, and the backup motor was trying to compensate. It would keep retracting until it ripped itself apart. He shouted, "Kill the power," but no one could reach the panel without walking directly under the swinging boom. The thought barely registered before he acted. He hooked one leg around the support strut, reached into his soaked pocket, and pulled out his rescue knife. "You saved me once," he said to Rook. "Time to return the favor." He swung forward the platform, bucking under his weight, and jammed the knife into the thick black cable feeding current to the hydraulic relay. Sparks exploded, instantly blinding him with white light. The jolt threw him backward, his hand burning, but the system stuttered the motor, whining one last time before dying completely. The platform slowed, then stopped moving altogether. The sudden silence was deafening. Darius hung there for a heartbeat, his chest heaving, the smell of ozone sharp in his nose. He blinked the spots out of his vision. Checking the line above him, it was still taut, but no longer straining. "We're good," someone yelled. "Pressure's stable." The relief hit like a wave, but it didn't last long. The moment Darius tried to shift his weight, the boom arm groaned again, deeper this time, almost like a growl. He looked up, just as a single thread of steel snapped free from the cable, spiraling down like a whip. Then another. "No, no, no," he muttered. The boom's hinge was giving way. He turned toward Rook, whose eyes had gone wide, his body shaking against the harness. "Don't you dare quit on me now," Darius said through clenched teeth. He reached up, grabbing the support beam above, and began to pull himself along the platform toward the base. His muscles screamed, his burned hand slick with blood and oil, but he moved anyway. Another snap echoed, this one louder, and the platform dropped 6 inches. "It's going," someone below shouted. "Get off!" Darius didn't answer. He swung his leg over the steel housing, kicked free from the collapsing section, and landed hard near the pivot joint. He grabbed the emergency release lever, a rusted handle painted yellow, and yanked it down with everything he had. The mechanism locked the safety pin, jamming into place with a sharp click. The arm froze mid-drop. The impact sent shockwaves through the entire rig, and the remaining bolts held barely. The men below erupted in shouts. "It's secure," one cried. The swamp was silent by the time they reached the Ranger outpost, a small wooden building standing on stilts above the flooded ground. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and steaming every surface slick with reflected moonlight. The rescuers unloaded Rook gently from the truck, his body wrapped in blankets, his fur still dripping dark water. Darius followed close behind, every step unsteady but determined. His legs ached from hours of strain, but he couldn't rest yet. The older rescuer led the way inside, pushing open the creaking door to reveal a narrow room lit by a single flickering bulb, powered by an old diesel generator out back. "It's not much," the man said, "but it'll do for the night." Darius nodded, brushing his hand over the dog's flank. "As long as he's warm, that's all that matters." They laid Rook on a folded tarp near the small wood stove in the corner. The young rescuer adjusted the fire-coaxing flames to life as Darius knelt beside the dog, wiping away the thickest patches of dried mud from his coat. The rhythm of it calmed him one slow stroke at a time, the world shrinking down to the circle of warmth between them. "He's a fighter," someone said behind him. "Most wouldn't have made it that long." Darius didn't look up. "He's more than a fighter," he said quietly. "He's got purpose." The words hung there for a moment, too heavy for anyone to answer. When the others finally stepped outside to check the equipment, Darius stayed behind alone with the sound of Rook's shallow breathing. The dog's chest rose unevenly, sometimes hitching in a small gasp that made Darius's heart tighten. He laid a hand gently against Rook's ribs, counting the beats the way he used to when calming trauma victims in the field. 1, 2, pause. The rhythm was failing. "Hey," he whispered, leaning close. "You stay with me, all right? You don't get to give up after all that." He looked around for the small oxygen tank one of the rescuers had brought in, but the gauge showed barely any pressure. They hadn't planned for an overnight emergency. He stood scanning the cluttered shelves along the wall, some gauze, a can of antiseptic spray, old towels. "Not enough. Come on," he muttered, pacing to the back door. He opened it, stepping into the humid night. The swamp buzzed with insects, the air thick with the smell of wet grass and oil from the generator. He circled to the side of the building, checking the old machine. It was sputtering, the fuel gauge nearly empty. The light inside flickered again. "You gotta be kidding me," he said under his breath. He kicked the base once more out of habit than hope, but the generator just coughed and died. The entire outpost went dark. "No, no, no," he muttered, sprinting back inside. The room was black except for the faint glow of the stove. He could hear Rook whining softly in the dark, disoriented. "Easy, boy. I'm right here," he said. He found a box of matches near the counter and lit one, the small flame casting trembling shadows across the room. He set it to a candle in an old glass jar, then crouched back beside Rook. The dog's breathing was worse now, shallow and uneven, his eyes half open but glassy. "Not like this," Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper. He grabbed a towel, tore it into strips, and soaked one end in warm water from a kettle left by the stove. He wrung it out, pressing it gently over Rook's chest to keep the muscles warm. "You just keep breathing, you hear me?" he said, his tone firm again. The dog shivered, but didn't move away. Darius leaned closer, his forehead almost touching the dog's, murmuring quiet words that weren't really for the dog, but for himself. He stayed like that for what felt like hours, the candle burning low, the swamp's nocturnal sounds filtering through the cracks in the walls. Then, as he adjusted the blanket around Rook's shoulders, something metallic fell out of his jacket pocket, a small rusted tag. It hit the floor with a soft clink. He froze, staring at it. The tag read Milo. He picked it up slowly, wiping the grime off with his thumb, and for the first time since he'd found it, he noticed the faded engraving on the back Unit 7 Search and Rescue Division. The words hit him like a ghost's breath. He knew that name. He'd been part of that unit 8 years ago, before an accident in a flood rescue took one of their dogs, Milo. The unit had disbanded after that mission. He looked down at Rook, now trembling softly under the towel, and everything connected in one dizzying rush. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. He turned the tag over again, the letters catching the candlelight. "Rook, you're from the same line, aren't you?" His mind went back to the way the dog had responded to his voice in rhythm, the way he'd refused to give up even when trapped. It wasn't just instinct, it was training, old training. Rook had been part of a successor program, one meant to rebuild what his old unit had lost. "You knew me," Darius said softly, his throat tightening. "You were one of us." He sat back hard, the realization cutting through the exhaustion. The room seemed to shrink around him. The years he'd spent running from his past, the guilt he carried for the ones he couldn't save it, had led him right back here, to this dog, to this swamp, to this moment. The candle flickered, and Rook stirred weakly, one paw twitching against the tarp. Darius leaned forward, pressing his hand against Rook's side again. The heartbeat was faint, but steadying. "That's it," he said, voice breaking. "You're still in the fight." He checked the dog's airway again, clearing away some mud still caked near its nose, then resumed warming the towel. The fire in the stove popped quietly, sparks flicking against the metal walls. He kept working through the night, one hand on Rook's chest, whispering every story he could remember about the old team, about the floods, about Milo. He was just like you, Darius said. Wouldn't let go even when the water was winning. The candle burned lower until only embers and faint light remained. Outside, the swamp was silent, except for the distant croak of a bullfrog and the slow hum of water moving through reeds. Morning came slow, filtered through mist and low fog rolling off the marsh. The sunlight hit the wooden walls of the outpost, turning every droplet into a tiny mirror. The generator sputtered back to life after someone had refueled it, bringing a faint hum and the glow of a single bulb flickering above the stove. Darius was still sitting on the floor beside Rook, his back against the wall, his hands resting gently over the dog's ribs. He hadn't slept. His eyes burned, but he couldn't stop watching the rise and fall of that chest, steady now, almost rhythmic again. Every few breaths, Rook made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh, the kind of noise dogs make when they're half dreaming. Darius smiled faintly. "Yeah, you earned that nap," he murmured. Outside, tires crunched over gravel. The rescue truck had returned. The same two men stepped out, followed by a woman in a clean field jacket with a medical patch on her shoulder. "Morning, Holt," the older rescuer said softly. "How's our boy?" Darius looked up, still fighting. The woman knelt beside Rook, her gloved hands moving with practiced care. She checked the eyes, the pulse, the temperature, and then gave a small nod. "He's weak, but he's stable. We'll take him to the Baton Rouge facility for fluids and a full check." Darius nodded, his throat dry. "Good. He deserves that." They brought in a stretcher, sliding it carefully under Rook. When they lifted the dog, let out a faint whine, his eyes opening halfway. "Easy boy," Darius said, crouching beside him, keeping one hand on his shoulder. "They're going to take care of you." But as the rescuers carried him toward the door, Rook's tail stiffened. The moment Darius moved to stand up, the dog let out a weak, broken growl. Everyone froze. "Whoa," the younger rescuer said, glancing over. "He doesn't want to go." Darius frowned, stepping closer. "Rook," he said softly, "it's all right. I'm right here." The growl faded, but the dog's eyes locked onto him, unblinking. The woman looked between them. "Maybe he's confused. Maybe he thinks you're leaving him." Darius crouched, resting a hand on Rook's paw. "I'm not leaving you, soldier. Not till you're walking again." The dog blinked once, then relaxed, the tension melting from his body. "Guess that settles that," the rescuer said with a grin. "We'll save you a seat, Holt." Darius exhaled, grabbing his jacket. Wouldn't have it any other way. The drive was quiet, except for the hum of the tires and the low whir of the cooling fans. Rook lay in the back on a stretcher, eyes half open, his breathing shallow but steady. Darius sat beside him, his hand resting gently on the edge. The rescuers up front talked in low voices, but he barely heard them. His mind kept looping back to that old tag in his pocket, the one that said Unit 7. He'd joined that team at 25, full of energy and conviction, certain that saving others was all he was built for. But life had different plans. Storm's failures, and one mission that ended with a flood taking more than just a teammate. That was when he'd walked away. Until yesterday. He looked down at Rook and saw the ghost of everything he'd once believed, in the patience, the loyalty, the refusal to quit, even when sinking. "You came back for me, didn't you?" he whispered. The dog's ear flicked as if in answer. The city hospital appeared at the edge of the horizon by late morning sunlight glinting off the steel roof. They backed into the loading bay where a team of veterinary techs waited with gurneys and clipboards. Darius helped them transfer Rook inside. The vet in charge, a thin man with graying hair, glanced at the file, then at the dog. "You said his name's Rook. That's what I called him," Darius said. "He never corrected me." The man smiled faintly. "We'll scan for a chip. Might have an owner somewhere." Darius nodded but looked away, not ready for that possibility. If someone had been searching for this dog, where had they been when he was dying in a swamp? The vet ran a small scanner across Rook's neck. The device beeped, then flashed a faint green light. The man frowned, adjusting the screen. "That's strange," he murmured. "What is it?" Darius asked. The vet turned the display so he could see. "This chip's old government issue coded for search and rescue animals. It's registered to a federal disaster unit, but the file's marked inactive." Darius leaned closer, reading the faint text on the small screen. "Unit 7, SAR Louisiana Division, Handler D, Holt." He froze. For a long moment, the room seemed to vanish around him. The noise, the light, the smell of antiseptic, it all blurred until there was only that line of text. The vet glanced up. "That your name?" Darius swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." He ran a hand through his hair, staring down at Rook. The realization hit him like a flood tide. Rook wasn't just connected to the old team. He was the direct descendant of the dog Darius had lost in that mission years ago, reborn through training, carrying the same genetic line, the same instincts, the same rhythm. "You brought him back," Darius murmured. "You really did." The vet smiled gently. "Sometimes the universe loops the right people back together." Darius didn't answer. He knelt beside Rook again, pressing a hand to his paw. "Guess we've been partners longer than I knew." Rook blinked slowly, his tail twitching against the gurney. The vet said, "He'll recover. It'll take time, but he's got the will for it. Dogs like him don't give up easy." Darius nodded, his eyes still locked on Rook. "Neither do men like me," he said softly. The vet chuckled. "Then you two were meant to find each other." The hours passed in a haze of cleaning, feeding, and quiet waiting. Darius stayed by Rook's side, watching the IV drip, listening to the faint beep of the monitor, keeping time with the dog's heartbeat. The steady rhythm felt like a conversation, the same rhythm he'd heard in those first strange barks calling him through the swamp. When the afternoon light turned gold, Darius finally stepped outside for air. The city was alive again, traffic and voices echoing down the street. He stood on the curb staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, he felt still inside. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the old tag that read Milo, and turned it over in his palm. The engraved words caught the sun gleaming faintly. "We keep saving each other, huh?" he said quietly. Behind him, he heard the soft tap of claws against tile. He turned and there was Rook, limping, still weak but upright. The vet followed behind, shaking his head. "He wouldn't stay in the kennel. Seems he prefers your company." Darius crouched, arms open, and Rook moved forward, pressing his head against Darius's chest. He smelled of soap and disinfectant now instead of mud, but he was still Rook, the same stubborn survivor. "You ready to go home, partner?" Darius asked. The dog's tail wagged once, a clear yes. The vet stood in the doorway. "You can take him when you're ready. Paperwork's easy. He's officially yours." Darius smiled, his throat tight. He always was. He straightened up, looking once more toward the fading sunlight. Somewhere deep in the swamp behind them, the storm had washed away their footprints, erasing the struggle, but leaving behind the bond. Darius glanced down at the tag in his hand, then clipped it to Rook's collar beside the new one they'd given him. "2 names," he said softly. "1 legacy." The road home was long and washed in light, the kind of golden afternoon that makes the world look new again after too much rain. The city faded behind them as Darius drove through open country, his truck rumbling steady along the back roads lined with oak and cypress. Rook lay in the passenger seat, wrapped in a clean blanket, his head resting on Darius's knee. The wind through the cracked window ruffled the dog's ears, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "You like that, huh?" Darius murmured. "No sirens, no machines, just wind." The dog let out a soft grunt, eyes half closed. It had been 3 days since the clinic released him, 3 days since the vet had smiled and said, "He's healing faster than expected. Must be the company." Darius hadn't argued. He didn't know if it was luck, faith, or something deeper, but every time he looked at Rook, he saw something that felt like destiny, like the world had owed them this meeting all along. The truck turned onto a gravel road lined with wild grass and ended at a small cabin surrounded by water oak and reeds. The place wasn't much, just an old fisherman's house he'd bought years ago when he'd decided to disappear from the world. He parked in front, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield at the sunlight filtering between trees. It felt strange coming home with something alive beside him again. He opened the door, stepped out, and waited as Rook hobbled carefully to the ground, his movements still stiff but determined. "Take it slow," Darius said, holding the door. The dog sniffed the air, then began exploring, tail wagging faintly. The air smelled of wet grass, diesel, and pine sap. Darius followed him to the edge of the clearing where the ground sloped down toward a wide field once used for training search and rescue dogs decades ago. He hadn't walked that way in years. Too many memories buried there literally and otherwise. "You know this place, don't you?" he said quietly, watching Rook pause at the edge of the tall grass. The dog lowered his head, sniffing, then looked back over his shoulder as if confirming something. Darius swallowed hard. He hadn't realized until now that the property line he'd bought years ago overlapped part of that field. The training grounds where Unit 7 used to run drills had extended this far south, now reclaimed by weeds and silence. He crouched, brushing his hand over a rusted fence post jutting from the dirt. "Full circle, huh?" he murmured. The wind stirred the grass, carrying the faint sound of frogs from the bayou. For the first time in years, he felt no weight in that silence, just peace. They spent the afternoon together in the yard. Rook lay in the shade while Darius repaired an old kennel behind the cabin, more for sentiment than need. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange, he sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, the steam curling up into the cooling air. Rook rested his head on his boot, eyes watching the horizon like he understood the meaning of quiet moments. "You know," Darius said, breaking the silence, "I think this was meant to happen. You showing up when you did, me being stubborn enough to listen." He looked down at the dog. "Milo would have liked you." The name slipped out before he could stop it. He reached into his pocket, feeling the familiar shape of the rusted tag. He turned it in his hand, the engraved letters catching the last of the sunlight. "We used to train out there," he said softly, nodding toward the field. "Flood drills night rescues everything. I lost him in one of those. Whole team almost went with him. I swore I'd never do it again." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Guess I lied." The dog lifted his eyes, tail thumping once against the porch step. "You brought that back," Darius said, smiling faintly. "The part of me I thought was gone." The evening deepened into night. The crickets started up, and a soft fog crept across the field. Darius rose, pocketing the tag again, and said, "Come on, partner. One last thing to do." He grabbed a small shovel from the porch and walked toward the edge of the field, Rook following close behind his gait, still uneven but steady. The grass brushed their legs as they reached the clearing, where the mud was soft and the earth smelled new. Darius stopped near an old post with faded paint still clinging to it, one of the old marker flags from Unit 7 training days. He stood there for a moment, looking down at the ground, then knelt, pressing the shovel into the soil. The sound of metal slicing dirt was quiet but final. He dug until he'd made a small hole about a foot deep, then pulled out the tag. "You earned your rest, buddy," he whispered, his voice catching. "You and every soul that fought with you." He laid the tag gently into the hole and covered it with damp earth, patting it down with his hand. The simple act felt heavier than any rescue he'd ever done, like closing a chapter he hadn't realized was still open. Behind him, Rook stood still, watching his breath slow and even. Darius turned and smiled. There, it's done. He picked up the shovel, wiped his hands on his jeans, and started to walk back toward the cabin. But then he heard the faint scrape of claws behind him. He turned just in time to see Rook pawing at the ground where he'd buried the tag. "Hey," Darius said softly. "Leave it, boy. It's over." But Rook didn't stop. He dug carefully, not frantic, like he knew exactly what he was looking for. Within seconds, the metal glinted again in the fading light. Rook nosed it free, picked it up in his mouth, and limped back toward Darius, tail wagging weakly. He dropped the tag at Darius's feet and sat down, panting, his eyes calm and certain. Darius stared at him, the meaning hitting all at once. The tag was never meant to stay buried. The past wasn't something to put away. It was something to carry forward. He knelt, picked up the tag, and pressed it against Rook's collar. "All right," he whispered. "You win. We keep it." He fastened it beside Rook's new tag, the two pieces of metal clinking together softly. "Two names," he said, voice barely above a breath. "One promise." The dog leaned forward, pressing his head into Darius's chest. Darius wrapped an arm around him, closing his eyes for a long moment, feeling the heartbeat against his ribs. The breeze stirred again, cool and clean, carrying the smell of rain and cypress. Above them, the sky had cleared completely, a deep, endless blue stretching across the horizon. "We don't quit, huh?" Darius said, looking out over the field. "Not them, not us, not ever." The dog's tail brushed his leg once more in agreement. They stood together until the last light faded, two survivors, bound by a story that started in the mud and ended in grace. Darius turned toward the cabin, his hand resting lightly on Rook's neck as they walked back through the damp grass. The porch light flickered to life, pale and steady, a beacon against the dark. He glanced down at the tags glinting in the glow and smiled. "Come on, partner," he said. "Let's go home." The swamp behind them murmured with life again, frogs calling water, moving leaves, whispering, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like ghosts. It sounded like gratitude, the end. If this story moved, you make sure to subscribe and share it so more people can hear stories like this one. Tell me in the comments what part of Rook and Darius's journey hit you the hardest, and where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to hear your thoughts.